want to welcome you back to this walk through Romans. Today we're going to be in Romans, the second chapter, verse number 28. Now, if you haven't been listening, let me encourage you to go and listen to some of the past podcasts so that you can understand the book of Romans. The book of Romans is a difficult book to understand just by itself. And so we've gone into the background context and we've gone into the verse context, and we're trying to present to you an understanding of this very vital book. You know, I don't believe there's a book of the Bible that covers salvation more than the book of Romans. But how many of you realize that before a person can come to Jesus, they need to realize their need for Jesus? And so about the first 7 chapters of the book of Romans is basically trying to convince 2 different people of their need for Jesus. He's trying to convince the Gentiles. Now, the Roman Gentiles were very proud. They were very much into pagan religions. And then he's also trying to convince the Jewish people of their need for Jesus. And so that's what the Apostle Paul is doing as he brings them through the understanding of salvation. You know, one of the things that we need to really understand ourselves is that if people don't understand and have a deep conviction of their need for salvation, their salvation will not find root in them. Now, today we're in Romans, the second chapter, verse number 28. And this is what the Apostle Paul wrote. For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. Now, what's the Apostle Paul talking about? Here, the Apostle Paul is taking to task the Jewish people. In fact, most of what we've been studying, Paul is aiming it at the Jewish people. The first chapter of Romans, he deals with the Roman people. He deals with the Gentile people. And then all of a sudden he begins to take to task the Jewish people. And the Jewish people believed that because they were outwardly circumcised, that they were in relationship with God. So Paul says, for he is not a Jew who is one outwardly. Paul is making a statement. He's making a very, very bold statement. Basically, Paul is saying, you know what? You don't have a relationship with God because of something you've done outwardly. Wow, that was news to these Jewish people. And again, Paul is trying to convince the Jewish people of their need for salvation. But then he goes on and he says this. He says, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. Now, when the Apostle Paul says that circumcision that is outward in the flesh, what the Apostle Paul is talking about is something that you can see on the outside. Let me ask you a question, even for Gentile Christians. How many Gentile Christians look at the outside of a person and judge their relationship with God? I remember a lady coming up to me and she was remarking about some of our teenagers that didn't look Christian. In fact, she said they don't look like Christians. And my reply to her was, and what does a Christian look like? You see, I believe Jesus very possibly had long hair. He had a beard, because it says they plucked his beard. Did Jesus look like a 20th century Christian? What does a 20th century Christian look like? And you see, that's what the Apostle Paul is trying to get at. He's trying to get us to understand what a real believer is. Now, verse number 29. But he is a Jew who is one inwardly. He is a Jew. He is a person that has a relationship with God because of something that happens inwardly. This word inwardly, actually, a better translation of this is something that's done in private. How many of you know your relationship with God, even though it's very important that you confess Him before men, it starts by something that's very private on the inside of you. And that's what the Apostle Paul is saying. But he is a Jew who is one inwardly. It starts here on the inside. And then he goes on and he says, and the circumcision is that which is of the heart. What is circumcision? The word circumcision means to cut. It's the cutting of the heart. The heart. Now, he's not talking about your physical heart. He's talking about your mind, your will, your emotions. He's talking about that part of your life where Jesus comes in and he begins to remove, begins to cut off all the stuff that is hindering your relationship with him. And so he says the circumcision is that which is of the heart, the real, true circumcision. And then he goes on and he tells us it's by the Spirit. It's not by a knife. It's not by a priest. It's by the Spirit of God. Only the Spirit of God can cut and take and remove the stuff out of your heart. It's by the Spirit. And then he goes on, he said, it's not by the letter. It's not by the letter of the law. It's by the Spirit of God moving on the inside of you, saying, you know what? Let's take care of this area of your life. Let's do a circumcision here in this area of your life. Let's look at that jealousy. Let's look at that bitterness. Let's look at that pride. And let's remove that. And he does it by the Spirit and not by the letter. And then the last thing that he says, and his praise is not from men. You see, the Jewish people were very into the praise of men. Look at me. Look what I've done. Look at me. And he said, it's not from the praise of men, but from God. You see, we need to understand that we need to live our lives, not so that people will praise us, not so people would say, wow, look at what he's done. Look at how holy he is. No, we need to live our lives in a way where the Spirit of God inwardly is working inside of us. And then who gets the praise? Not us, but God. God changes lives. God changes lives. You see, that's what the Apostle Paul is trying to get into the minds of these Jewish people that are in Rome. It's all about what happens when God comes into your life, when Jesus comes into your life and begins to change you. Thank you for watching today. Join us again tomorrow as we continue our walk through the book of Romans.